Holden's idea of being a catcher in the rye, of course, is what the book is named after, so it's pretty important. This comes up when Holden is asked by Phoebe, what do you like? What do you even want to do with your life? And he doesn't really want to do anything, honestly, because he's irresponsible and is very depressed, doesn't want to think about his future. But when he finally comes up with something, it's a completely made up thing. He got the words, he got the idea of the phrase from a song that he heard a little kid singing earlier in the book that he thought it was really nice. This is on page 191, by the way, if this is something that you need to review in the novel. Not a bad idea. But when he says that this is what he wants to be, Phoebe says, okay, but those aren't the words. It's not when a body catch a body. It's if a body meet a body coming through the rye. This poem by Robert Burns is what the real song is based on. And that might seem like not a very big deal, but once we get into the details of, what a catcher in the rye is, that meet versus catch is actually pretty significant. So big things here. What does Holden want to be when he grows up? Something that's not real, that he made up based on the incorrect lyrics of a song. That's not really a good place to be in your life if you're doing career planning. Okay, so now I'm drawing the cliff. So Holden says that he is going to be in this field of rye. That green stuff is the rye. Rye is just a crop like wheat or corn. So there's a bunch of kids who are just running around there and just playing, having fun, not looking what they're doing, not paying attention. And Holden is the only big person, which we can take to mean kind of like the only adult, although he doesn't seem to want to call himself an adult. But he says his job is to stand there at the edge of this big crazy cliff and make sure that none of the kids fall off the edge because they're not paying attention. So this tells us a lot about Holden's ideas about childhood and adulthood. So if we're thinking about being on the cliff as childhood or innocence, you can be carefree. You don't worry about troubles. I'm spelling innocence wrong, sorry. You don't worry about troubles in the world around you. But there's always the possibility that, out of nowhere, something could happen that could change your reality very quickly, something that could wake you up to the realities of adulthood. And adulthood is something that Holden associates with corruption. So Holden, it tells us that Holden thinks of growing up as a matter of falling down, which is pretty sad. It also is something that's not reversible. Like once you become an adult, once you become corrupt, you can't ever reclaim that childhood innocence. And so he really sees adulthood or growing up as a sad thing that he wants children to not have to go through. And I this isn't something that Holden actually says in the book, but I usually think of Allie being kind of like he's buried in the field of rye. Again, not literally, but remember, Allie was 11 when he died. He will never grow up. And so this could be a reason why Holden seems so fixated on the importance of childhood and innocence, is because his brother, who he lost, is always going to, maintain that. And since Holden idolizes his brother, then that's kind of where he sees him. He's never going to have to worry about him. He's always going to be in that place of childhood. He's never going to become corrupt, like DB did, or like Ernie is, or even Holden is certainly doing a lot of things that are veering towards corruption. So he's on the edge of the cliff. He's not quite a child anymore. He's also doesn't want to see himself as a real adult either, but he's going to catch kids so that they don't fall off the cliff and become adults or become corrupt. Okay, now we're going to get into motifs and symbols. As a reminder, a motif is a repeated image or idea in a work of literature. And a symbol is something that represents something else. So usually it's an object, some kind of an item that represents a bigger idea. So first off, with the Little Shirley Beans record, basic details about it. It is a children's song about a little girl who loses her two front teeth, so definitely a kid's song, but it is sung in a jazzy adult sort of style, and so Holden really likes that it's a kid's song, but it's not really cheesy. It still is like an adult. So it kind of is like Holden with that mixture of immaturity and maturity, kind of blended together. He buys it for $5. He gets it for Phoebe when he's in New York City. But he ends up dropping it and breaking it when he has left Wicker Bar and is very drunk. When he breaks the record, when he drops it, he picks up the pieces and he puts them in his pocket, and then later gives them to Phoebe. And rather than throwing them away, like you probably should do with a broken record, Phoebe takes the pieces and puts them away in a drawer, like they're special to her, like she's going to keep them. So potential symbolic meanings here. The fact that the record has that combination of immaturity and maturity or innocence and corruption makes it fit along with who Holden is. So when he breaks the record, I mean, you could think of at that point in the book, Holden has been drinking a lot, is taking very bad care of himself, is outside with soaking wet hair in winter in New York City. And so he's broken in a sense. And also when he gives those broken pieces to Phoebe, that could be like saying, she's willing to accept him. She still cares about him, even if he's broken. She still loves this gift that he gave her. Also, the breaking of the record could be seen as something like the way that Holden sees the Catcher in the Rye. That it's like, once the record's broken, you can't put it back together again. And in Holden's vision of being a catcher in the rye, once somebody falls off the cliff into adulthood, they're not ever able to get back into that field of rye again. So that kind of irreversibility is similar. Then we have the ducks. The ducks are the topic that Holden goes to a lot when his mind is wandering. It's a common digression. He first thinks about them when he is talking to Mr. Spencer. He starts wondering, where do the ducks go in the winter when it gets cold? Is there some guy who comes in a truck and picks them up? What happens? And he keeps coming back to this question, and it's something that seems very obvious. It seems like something that a junior in high school should definitely know and not think that somebody at the zoo has to go pick up the ducks at the park to keep them safe during the winter. But he asks a couple different people about it. It's a kind of a fixation for him. One cab driver he asks doesn't really want to talk to him about it. And then another cab driver, Horowitz, tells him, gets kind of mad, like, what do you mean, what happens to the ducks? And then starts talking about what happens to the fish. And he tells Holden that when it gets cold and the lake freezes, the fish just freeze right in place and they absorb all their nutrients through their pores, and they're absolutely fine, because Mother Nature created them in a way that they would be taken care of in the winter. Of course, Horowitz is completely wrong in how fish survive through the winter. But that idea that Mother Nature will take care of them is something that he says about Holden too. Even though he's just a random cab driver, he tells Holden, if Mother Nature takes care of the fish and the ducks by sending the ducks south for the winter, don't you think that you'll be taken care of? So Holden being desperate and thinking that he has no one to turn to, this cab driver is basically kind of trying to tell him, like, everything's going to work out. You'll find somebody to take care of you. The museum is one of Holden's favorite things. It is one of the rare times in the book where he says that he felt happy thinking about it. He associates it with childhood. He goes into a lot of detail describing all the things that he used to see there when he was a little kid going there for school. And the thing he loves about it the most is that it never changes. It always stays the same. Which, when we think about, picking up from that last slide, just a little bit more about the museum. Nothing changes there. Holden really likes that. It's similar to the way that he thinks about children staying in the field of rye. He doesn't want to have to grow up. He doesn't want things to have to change. The carousel at the end of the book is a pretty significant scene in deciding whether you think Holden grows up at the end or not. In class, we talked about the carousel having a ring on the outside, where every time the horses go by the ring, kids lean off the edge of the carousel and try to grab it. And Holden, whereas I mean his whole idea of being a catcher in the rye involves catching children, stopping them from growing up. In the case of the carousel, he actually says it's about Phoebe, like she's reaching for the ring, she might fall, but you have to just let that happen if it's going to happen. So this could potentially be a sign that he's willing to let go of this crazy fantasy and realize that that Phoebe will grow up and it's okay. That's a normal part of life. He doesn't need to catch her. He doesn't need to get in the way. Also significant about the carousel is that it's only little kids who are riding on it, and Phoebe really wants him to come with her, but instead he buys her a ticket and says she should go along. So he can enjoy, he can still enjoy the fact that she's a child, but he doesn't need to be a child anymore. Maybe is something you could read into that. With Allie's baseball mitt, we talked about this a bit earlier with Allie, but it's a left-handed mitt. It has poems written on it in green ink because Allie used to get bored in the outfield. And Holden has held on to it since Allie's death, which would have been, I guess, 5 years before, but he still is bringing it with him to these different boarding schools. And it really is a symbol of how Holden is unwilling to let go of the memory of his brother. He wants to, keep him close. The mitt is also the subject of the essay that he tries to write for Stradlater that Stradlater then insults, resulting in Holden tearing it up. And then I also put Ernie on here because I didn't really talk about him with characters. Ernie is the bar owner from the middle of the book. Holden goes there because he remembers it being a place that DB likes. And Ernie is really good at playing the piano, but of course, that's something that bothers Holden, not because he doesn't like piano, but because he thinks that if somebody is really good at something, they shouldn't be a sellout. He talks about how Ernie plays the piano with a mirror that shows the audience his face instead of his hands, which Holden thinks shows that he doesn't really care about the music. He just cares about his own popularity or his own fame. So, of course, that means he's a sellout. Very similar to the way that Holden sees DB as a sellout for writing movies in Hollywood instead of writing these nice children's stories. And Holden actually says, if I were a great piano player, I would play it in the closet. Again, because of something special, you shouldn't share it with anybody. And we talked a bit in class about this being, putting your light under a bushel. That's exactly what Holden thinks you should do. And it's he really has a warped view of what it means to be successful and of what it means to appreciate the talents that you have. So I think that wraps up things on big motifs and symbols. Some of these might be really useful to you in your essay topic. All right, lastly, something that I had on the study guide was Holden's deteriorating health, and I just kind of want to point this out. I have a list of different things that happen throughout the book. His Holden's health seems to get worse and worse at the same time that his mental health gets worse and worse. He gets more and more depressed towards the end, more lonely, more isolated, and also is experiencing physical symptoms like fainting at the museum or having headaches or randomly crying for seemingly no reason, including at the very end when he's watching Phoebe on the carousel. So by the time we get to the end of the frame story, we see, there's real reasons for him to be wherever it is he's telling the story from, mental hospital or regular hospital or something, because he is really falling apart, and the physical health goes along with the mental health.